Thank you.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing here today? We got Majorly Awesome here, and we've got Inland Auditing Media. As you guys know, I am free. We're going to be going over the laws and stuff that pertain to filming in the post office. Um, Inland Auditing Media is,
Hello.
yep, he's shown to be quite the expert on the subject, so I'm going to defer to him. I'll be asking questions and clarifying some stuff, maybe. But other than that, this is pretty much going to be his rundown on what he's done, researched, discovered, and can bring to our attention. Because we've been talking, and we noticed that a lot of new auditors out there are getting arrested at post offices. It's been quite the I don't know, quite the boon for the anti-frauditor channels is a lot of folks have been getting arrested or trespassed from post office property for filming. So we want to make sure that all the auditors out there are safe that are doing this and that they have the correct information when they're out there doing this. So without further ado, we're going to let Inland Auditing Media. He's got a plan laid out for us today, and he's ready to execute that. So go ahead, Mister. I am free.
Well, again, thank you for having me. I wanted to start off with a caveat, if I could, which is I am not a lawyer. I have never been to law school. I don't have a degree. I've never in law. I've never taken the bar exam. I have no official status in any of those ways. So if any of you have any questions or concerns about what I'm putting out, which is just my opinions based on things that I have read and tried to educate myself about as a citizen and a journalist, um, obviously go to a lawyer, especially in your jurisdiction. I think that's really important. And also, Major, thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's very kind of you.
Well, like I said, sir, you do excellent work. So, I like to surround myself with people that are knowledgeable and that are out there doing good work, and that fits your description to a T. Now, give me ID.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yep.
All
All right,
right.
go ahead, sir.
So, what I wanted to start with is I know there's a little bit of mystery sometimes for some people. I've had questions about this on my channel, and I'm sure, Major, you have on yours, and many other people have seen it about the Code of Federal Regulations, the United States Code. What are they? How do they exist? I'm not going to go into a deep primer on this. I just want to lay a little bit of information out there so as we go through the rest of the information today, it makes a little more sense. So, the Code of Federal Regulations is, first of all, published in what's called the Federal Register. Congress creates what are called authoritative statutes, and that entails something called a substantive scope that instructs some official, whoever that official is, like a cabinet member, let's say the Secretary of Defense, whatever, to do certain things. And then they create procedural requirements such as utilizing the Administrative Procedures Act. That's just one of many examples. And that instructs that individual in this example, the Secretary of Defense, on what procedural requirements that person has and what body of administrative law or whatnot they need to refer to. So, in my example, the Administrative Procedures Act. The reason the Code of Federal Regulations are important is because the whole idea behind the CFRs is Congress saying we're going to give these executive branch agencies latitude to create rules so that they can manage what they're doing during the day. And in those CFRs, it's broken up into 50 titles. And they basically break down exactly what you need to see in terms of what part of the government you have questions about or that you want to look up information about. And when you're reading these, because later on I'm going to be referencing these, the first number you'll see is the title. So I'm going to give an example of 39 CFR 232. That's the USPS title for the CFRs. So the first number you see is the title. Then it says CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations. The next number you see, which is 232, is the chapter. And then the point one is the part. And then if you see like I, would be the section. And then if you see a number one after that, it would be the paragraph. So it's title, chapter, part, section, and paragraph. And that's how you make sense of those CFRs and like where you're going. So that being said, United States codes are laws. They're just straight up statutes. They tell you, like for example, with murder or kidnapping or whatever it is, what the law is. So the way to think about this is that statutory laws, which are United States codes, they sort of provide the framework and the overarching principles of what Congress wants to do through their legislation. The regulatory laws, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, details the specific rules and requirements at an agency level. So, because we're talking about the post office today, we're going to talk a lot about Title 39 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 232. So, that's pretty much all I wanted to go over on CFRs and US code, just to kind of make sense of like what this is and why I'm going to be referring to it and how the CFRs are different than code. Um, I don't know, Major, does any of the audience have any viewers have any questions maybe that
I mean,
at
they're
this
just
point?
chatting back and forth right now, but I'm sure if
Okay.
they have any questions, I'll put them up on screen. And I just wanted to interject there real quick that I had always been taught that the code was sort of like the skeleton of the law, and the CFRs were sort of the meat of the law. So, like you were saying, the Congress, passes law saying, hey, we want to set up the post office, but we don't want to spend the time to write every regulation that's needed to help run the post office the way it should be ran. So we're going to give that power, the administrative act, like you said, to the post office, postmaster general, and the post. They have a board that helps run the post office,
Mhm.
and we're going to give that power to them, and which then they come up with the regulations, and then they submit it, and it's included then in the Code of Federal Regulations. Is that about right? Is that
Yeah, I think that's a great just regular way to put it. I yeah, couldn't agree more. That's a great way to do it. So, um, like I said, if there's any questions about any of this for anyone, just pop it up and that'll be that. So you good for me to move on to the next part, Major?
absolutely?
So the next part that matters, I think, very significantly is jurisdictions, because based on the jurisdiction, it's going to instruct federal, state, or local, and by local I mean district or municipality law enforcement as to whether they can or cannot do something there. So jurisdictions, as I'm sure all of you know, are just a zone, if you will, that says certain government agencies, to include law enforcement, do or do not possess authority in that area. Good example would be you can't have an Idaho sheriff's deputy from, let's say, Kootenai County going into Pend Oreille County in Washington State and enforcing law there because they're out of their jurisdiction. So the jurisdictions that matter today that I'm going to discuss regarding the post office are proprietary, exclusive, and concurrent legislative jurisdictions. So they're pretty simple. Proprietary is where the federal government has what would be called a titled interest in the land. So they're the owner of the land. But the state has not ceded law enforcement authority in that area. So again, the best way to think about proprietary jurisdiction is um, the federal government's the property owner, but they're using state laws and law enforcement resources to enforce those state laws there. Exclusive jurisdiction is where, and this is really important for post offices, law enforcement duties are solely that of the United States government. And one of the easiest ways to think about this is a military installation. Let's say in the Seattle area, you've got multiple naval installations like the Bremerton Naval Yards. That's an exclusive jurisdiction for the federal government. And so they would be charging you and trying you in a federal court. The concurrent legislative jurisdiction is where you will have, let's say, post offices that are not on exclusively owned federal property. And because they're leased, which is what most post offices are these days, because they're leased, that means that local law enforcement, city, county, and state, have jurisdiction along with federal law enforcement. So they share that. And whoever ends up making an arrest or issuing a citation or whatnot is going to inform that individual as to where they're going, whether it's going to be a local court or federal court. So those are the aspects of jurisdiction that I wanted to cover, because one of the things that matters so much, and Major was pointing to this earlier, where you're seeing auditors, citizen journalists, and others getting arrested for different things, is because they're not understanding the jurisdiction, they're not understanding how things apply, and whether or not someone can do something or not. And later on, I'm going to be uh, having Major put up a couple links, if possible, to show how you can tell if a post office is exclusive jurisdiction or if it's concurrent legislative jurisdiction. So, a few things about uh, where all this comes from. Like, how do we know? How do we actually know that the federal government has the authority over the post office? I know we all look at this and say, well, it's sort of common sense, but it's good to just understand the font of authority so you can move from there as you look into case law and whatnot. The United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 7 and 17 describe authority as it relates to the post office. And in Clause 7, it says that the United States has the power to establish post offices and post roads. Really simple. That's a great thing about things back then. They didn't really try to complicate them too much if they didn't have to. And in Clause 17, and this is important, it says it's the enclave clause. And in that, it identifies something that's referred to as other needful buildings. And this is important because there's two cases I'm going to go over today that discuss what other needful buildings are and how the Supreme Court of the United States ruled on that and clarified exactly what post offices are as it relates to jurisdictions. So there is a United States code. Remember, those are statutes. In Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 7, it's titled the Special Maritime and Territorial Jurisdiction. And in subsection 3, or section 3 rather, it says any lands reserved or required for the United States and under the exclusive or concurrent jurisdiction thereof, or any place placed or otherwise acquired by the United States by consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of a fort, magazine, arsenal, dockyard, or other needful building. And you're probably wondering, why am I making such a big deal about this? Why is it important that at this point, allegedly, post offices are other needful buildings? Because it speaks to the jurisdiction of the United States government or the states. And we know this because there's two cases, one from 1908 and another from 1937. The 1908 case is called Battle versus United States. It's 209 US 36. And in this case, it was a murder case. And there was a disagreement about whether this guy could get capital punishment or not, and whether a post office had jurisdiction, or if there was jurisdiction in a post office. And in that case, the quote was, post offices are among the other needful buildings for the erection of which, as well as other forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards. And the Chief Justice who wrote that opinion back in 1908 cited the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, the one I mentioned above earlier. And then finishes by saying, indeed, this is not denied. And in Dravo, which was just a tax case involving the USPS and Mr. Dravo's construction company in 1937, in 302 US 134, the court again affirmed for a different reason. So the original one was murder in 1908. This one's a tax case. And the Supreme Court again upheld that other needful buildings are post offices. So that's how we can understand the nature and authority of jurisdictions as it relates to exclusive or leased facilities. And then I wanted to see if it's possible, Major, for those links that I shared with you earlier in chat for the owned and leased facilities. If
I
you
did
ever,
put up
oh, okay.
the one for own, but on the
Mhm.
second one, it's a library. It says library. I didn't see where it said leased facilities.
Oh, did I give you the wrong link? Hold on just a moment here.
Yeah, you
I
gave me
can
the
just,
FOIA library link,
oh, yeah, sorry about that.
which is cool, but it wasn't. Yeah, it didn't say anything about leased facilities, so I was wondering.
Uh, okay, here you go. Yep, you're right. I totally gave you the wrong one. Sorry about that.
That's fine. So I'll
Here it
put
is.
the own facilities link that's coming to everybody in the chat right now, and then I'll put up the leased facility link, and that's going to be coming in the chat in just a second as well. No rats. IM is not a lawyer. He gave that disclaimer at the beginning. This is just research that anybody could do. Um, you know, people involved in auditing, we take the time to actually look a lot of this stuff up. And Inland has done a awesome job of looking this stuff up and finding where the authority is for all of this. So, okay, we've got those links into the chat there for you, Inland. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
hmm
So, everyone, what you can do is anybody can do this. You can just click on those links. And if you go there, what you'll see is for the owned facilities, you'll have a list, a breakdown by state, and they're in Excel spreadsheet form when you download it. It shows you what facilities are owned by state and location within the state. And I always feel it's important if you're working on a story, like I do when I go out and, as you guys have heard many times, get my feet on the street. Um, you want to understand the nature of the environment that you're going to before you go there to work your story, because if you can't push as far as you are able to lawfully while you're there working this story, there's a chance you're going to miss something that's relevant to the story. And tools like these allow you to understand where that line is so you don't cross it and get unnecessarily arrested. I think that's always the concern, of course, for being a citizen journalist. So those are really great resources. Check those out if you guys are interested. Um, the next thing I wanted to get into specifically to the United States Postal Service are codes, regulations, and statutes that are related and valuable to be aware of and be knowledgeable about when you go to a postal property. So there's a lot of different stories that you guys will see out there where someone, let's say, is at a IRS building. I've been to one myself, and maybe someone's at a post office or whatever. Depending on where you're at, there's likely going to be a separate title in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is why I went over that stuff earlier, that will instruct you on the rules and regulations as to where you're going. And for the postal properties, it's Title 39 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 232, Section 1, or sorry, Part 1, Section I, and that's titled Co- Conduct on Postal Property, and Section I is photographs for news, advertising, or commercial purposes. I want to give you guys a forewarning. There's going to be some serious grammar nerding here in a little bit, because if you look at some videos from frauditor channels, they'll mention like line for line things that I'm just about to mention, and we're going to get down to the dreaded comma because it's so important in this particular section of Title 39 of the CFR 232.1. So I'm going to read this and then I'm going to go into this a little bit. So it says, except as prohibited by official signs or the directions of security force personnel. I'm going to go into all this, or other authorized personnel, or a federal court order or rule. Photographs for news purposes may be taken in entrances, comma, lobbies, comma, foyers, comma, corridors, comma, or auditoriums when used for public meetings. Other photographs may be taken only with the permission of the local postmaster or installation head. Now, I'm hoping my grammar instructors from when I was much younger are not listening and that I'm not incorrect here. But when you look at or auditoriums when used for public meetings, there's a lot of rules about commas. And the fact that there isn't a comma after auditoriums is intentional and meaningful. It's very important because what it's meaning is those previous commas at entrances, lobbies, foyers, and corridors are simply just a natural pause to give understanding that these are separate locations that you can do it in. And the fact that there is no comma after auditoriums is meant to have a set off for the previous, what's referred to as a set off in grammar, at the end of the sentence that refer back to the beginning or the middle of the sentence. That doesn't exist after auditoriums. And the reason that is because when it says or auditoriums when used for public meetings, when used for public meetings has nothing to do with entrances, lobbies, foyers, and corridors. And this is what frauditor channels will try to say. One of the things they'll try to say. Well, you can take photos for news and advertising and commercial purposes as long as in the entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, and auditoriums, it's when public meetings are occurring. That's incorrect. The auditoriums, you can do news, advertising, or commercial purposes, take photo and video in when a public meeting is happening in an auditorium. Otherwise, you can't take news of advertising, commercial purpose, photo, and video in auditoriums if there's not a public meeting there. The entrances, lobbies, foyers, and corridors, however, my understanding of this is that you can take video, audio, and still photo images for news, advertising, commercial purposes. And that is, I think, a really important distinction to understand. There may be people that disagree with me, and I'd love to read those comments and even potentially have a discussion about it. But my understanding is that is an incredibly important point to make on this, the dreaded comma.
Well, yeah, not only the comma, if I may hold up for just a second, but
Sure.
the word or, right? Just the common usage of the word or should tell you that either or. You can either take photos in the lobby or you could take photos in the auditorium when there's a meeting, right? Because like you said, there's no comma after auditoriums, so that would include the public meeting with the rest of the areas. So the way I read it is that I can take photos in the entrances, lobbies, foyers, and corridors, no matter what. And then, like you said, or if there's a meeting going on in the auditorium, then I could take photos there as well. Um, when it goes down below that to the other photographs, this is where I think a lot of people showed their lack of common sense to me, because it says other photos may be taken only with the permission of the local postmaster. So the word other signifies to me that not all photographs need the permission, that we've already been given permission to take certain photographs. And then when I look a little bit further up, it's, oh yeah, I did get permission to take photos in the lobbies, foyers, and corridors. So I think there's a lot of I guess, misapplied common sense on the anti-auditor side when it comes to reading this small paragraph.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I was definitely going to dig into other paragraph. I mean, or photographs rather. I agree there. And yes, I think your reference to or auditoriums is significant. And that's why imagine if it said corridors, comma, or auditoriums, comma. That pause would naturally mean that the clause coming after, when used for public meetings, would apply to all of the aforementioned. But the fact that there is no comma after auditoriums is meaning the relationship between auditoriums and the rest of that clause is meant to indicate the relationship between those two and only those two. And I think that's the key here. A lot of people, what's that from Six Oaks Farm? Yeah, Six Oaks Farm. I completely understand your point there, and this is the challenge. Is that what I'm speaking to is my understanding, and I'll reiterate. I'm not a lawyer. I have not taken the bar. I have not been to law school, any of that. But you make a really great and salient point, Six Oaks Farm, which is you're going to have judges in different places applying different grammatic rules, perhaps. And ultimately, this stuff you could absolutely see, depending on how important the case is, the Supreme Court making a comma rule.
Right. And let me address this specifically because, as most of you know, I'm going up on these same charges that DMA had as well. And I wanted to point out that the reason the judge took the definitions from the Oxford Dictionary rather than Black's was because if you look in 41 CFR, it said that it's supposed to be done in a plain language reading, right? So it's not supposed to be read with words or terms of art, which is what you find in Black's Law dictionaries, where you'll find words and terms of art. And in Oxford dictionaries, where you're going to find the plain language meaning of the words. And I don't want to give up too much because, again, this is my case that's coming up. But in DMA's case, and if you read the case, which is online, you can read everything online. What you'll see is that the judge had posted the correct definitions, but then he ignored the definitions and said that the foyer was the same as a lobby and the same as a corridor, right? Which we know to not be true. And you can even see it in the definitions that the judge himself provides. So I don't know how that judge in DMA's case did that leap of logic to assume that a foyer uh, was the same as a lobby, right? Because what he tried to use was he tried to use a rule of statutory construction that says, if you have a certain group of words that mean the same thing, and then you have a general word, then it means something, similar to that or what have you not. Um, it's just real strange. But yeah, I mean, there's no way that the lobby and the foyer definition, whether it's in Oxford or in Black's Law, is probably going to mean the same thing. So I don't know where the judge got that from, but I did want to address that because uh, the 41 CFR does say that it should be addressed as a plain language reading.
Yeah, I agree, and that's where I think Six Oaks Farms, point is just particularly salient. Is you're going to get some judges that'll dismiss that. They'll just, for whatever reason, and this goes down a rabbit hole of jurisprudence that is not, germane to our discussion today. But it it is those inconsistencies and sometimes seemingly small things like a comma that can make a gigantic difference, or what source you're citing from, which dictionary and whatnot. So I agree. It's it's frustrating because this is one of the things that we all have to accept too when we're going out as citizen journalists. Is I or anyone else could absolutely be correct in the end, but that doesn't mean you're going to not have to run the gauntlet of, let's say, the 10th Circuit and their different way of grammatical construction and whatnot to come to some endpoint. And that's frustrating. It's really frustrating. Um, so a couple other things I wanted to go over with this photographs for news advertising or commercial purposes is security force personnel. That's addressed in 39 CFR 232.1 in section Q, paragraph 2. And it talks about the authority of security force personnel, defines them, and lays out exactly how and where their authority is derived from. And that's basically the US Postal Inspection Service. And as Major managed to find, as we were talking about before the show today, in finding a unicorn, there are actually postal police officers out there. I've never seen one in person, but Major has. That's pretty impressive. So that would be what the security force personnel is. Now, here's the real big one. I think this is the big one because if any of you have watched my have viewed my stories, my very first one was in Renton, Washington, at the USPS there, and one of the finest police officers ever witnessed, Sergeant Skelton, ended up turning out to not only save the day but just be an amazing police officer. And my preparation for my very first story was really digging into the statutes, the codes, etc., and looking at or other authorized personnel. And I knew if someone was going to abuse it, that's where they were going to go to because it's so vague. And sure enough, that blonde Karen in the story ended up going exactly to that. And what I pulled out of my pocket was copies of email exchanges between myself and a guy named Rod Spurgeon. Rod Spurgeon at the time, I don't know if he still is, was the strategic communications officer for the United States Postal Service. And in this email exchange, which I have here and I'll read from, is what ultimately prevented that woman, that blonde Karen lady, from having me trespassed or having the trespass maintained because of the vagary of it. And so what happened is I reached out to this Rod Spurgeon guy and I said, "Hey, I got a question about this. Who are other authorized personnel?" And I was acting like I was a person that didn't want the quote auditor to be there. And he explained in the letter what First Amendment auditing is, what the movement's about, and that there are rules and regulations that govern the conduct. And he basically quoted the photograph for news advertising or commercial purposes. And then I responded by saying, "Hi, Rod. Thank you for the swift reply. I was wondering specifically who the quote, other authorized personnel, end quote, would be from the regulations. Specifically, could I ask a postal clerk or postmaster to kick out a self proclaimed quote, auditor? Thank you again very much for your time, sir." To which he replied, "Our policy is to allow videographers, whether it's a local news station or a self identified auditor, to film as long as they do not impede operations such as blocking access through a doorway or preventing customers from transacting business in a postal facility." He didn't really answer the question about other authorized personnel, so I pushed and I said, "Gotcha. So basically, put, it's just something I need to contend with, it sounds like, as it is the right to video and photo. Is that correct? There are no other authorized personnel that I can get to kick out such an auditor if I'm understanding correctly?" Question mark. To which Rod says, "Correct. We respect the opportunity to film in our lobbies as long as it doesn't disrupt operations." Now, I don't want to just rely on the emails from Rod. Oh, great. Thanks for putting that up, Major. I don't want to just rely on that. There is also a section, or excuse me, a chapter within 39 CFR, and it's 39 CFR 222.1. And the title of that chapter in the post office title is Authority to Administer Postal Affairs. And this chapter lays out effectively who are those other authorized personnel, and it comports exactly with what Rod was getting at. And in it, it says that that power, that authority is limited to either the postmaster general, corporate officers, which are like the CFO, CIO, general legal counsel, etc. Um, it's limited to those. Now, obviously, the postmaster could delegate that authority to a postmaster, for example, at a local place, but they need to have that authority and they need to be able to present it because, as you can see from Rod's email, that limitation was expressly clarified by him. And Major, I'm going to put a link in the chat. Um, that link right there, Major, is to the leadership. So when I read that that title in the Code of Federal Regulations, that chapter, that is the officers that they're speaking about when you look at 39 CFR 222.1. So that kind of, I think, lays out and addresses the photographs for news, advertising, or commercial purposes. I know that's kind of a really in the weeds thing, but I think it's extremely important and germane to what we're seeing, as Major talked about earlier, with seemingly a resurgence of individuals getting arrested in post offices. And the other caveat I'll throw out there is obviously, if you're being disorderly, if you're committing some other sort of crime, they can arrest you for that. Um, but if you're not doing anything wrong other than just doing what clearly the CFRs say, this is the kind of information that's going to be relevant.
Right. And if I may interject just for a quick second with the
Mhm.
authorized personnel, to me, again, it's another common sense issue, right? Because if the Postmaster General has given permission, who has the authority to override the Postmaster General, right? And if you're doing exactly what the Postmaster General has given you permission to do, if they had wanted any Tom, Dick, or Harry to be able to override the Postmaster General's permission, then I would imagine that they would have just said all photography is regulated by the postmaster of the facility, right? They wouldn't have just given blanket permission to record there if the lady working at the counter could override the postmaster general. So I've always taken it to mean that if you are breaking some other code in the CFR there or a law have you, then they become authorized in order to tell you to stop and to leave and to have you arrested for trespassing and that sort of thing. But if you're doing what the postmaster or the postmaster general has given you permission for, then really there's nobody with authority higher than him to take that away from you. Right? I mean, doesn't that make sense?
I agree. I mean, and I think it's particularly important to use the term common sense. Unfortunately, and as I had mentioned in preparing for my very first story, which was at that post office, it's all about the rules, and it's also about like your intro um, on your channel when you talk about power, and you see the screen kind of go fuzzy there. That's what this is about. These people are going to grab onto anything they can in any way that they can and try to twist it to their ends. And if you notice by watching that story, the first two police officers that did show up trespassed me. They just did it whimsically. They were just like, well, these people are in charge of everything in the post office. They can do anything they want. So you're out of here. It wasn't until I got a police officer, Sergeant Skelton, who chose to do basically his regular duties, which is just to investigate. And if any of you have seen that story, yeah, you'll see. He says, well, I got all the time in the world for you. Let's go and investigate this. And I was standing outside the post office, still technically trespassed for 45 minutes. And when you see him come out at the end of the story, he's like, "Hey, I appreciate your time, waiting and everything. But yeah, you're right. You're good to go. Trespass is lifted. You can go back in." And that's where this comes from. And it also relates to the Covington USPS, where I told those 5 officers, I said, "You can't be here with your firearm. You got to go. You're committing felonies right now. You have no lawful authority to be present with your weapons. Now, if you want to take your weapons off and then come back in, sure. I mean, doesn't mean they have any authority to do anything while I'm there, short of me committing a felony in their presence, because at that point, any citizen could do something and take that person who's committing a felony into custody for a citizen's arrest. But this is important because if they do not have authority to be there, even if they end up trespassing you under threat of arrest and you decide, okay, I'll deal with this civilly later, what you can do is by expressing these things concisely and clearly and ordinally, you can put them in a position where, sure, they've, quote, won the battle in the moment, but they're going to lose it later. And it's all going to be right there for them. That's why I carry copies of those statutes and codes with me when I go in, so I can show it to them and I can show that I made a good faith effort. Because every time I go to a place to do a story and I prepare for it, I assume whatever's being viewed is going to be, or recorded is going to be viewed by a jury. Did you want to show that video, Major? I wasn't sure. Are you going to show the video that you're pulling up right now, Major? Okay. Well, in the meanwhile, I'll move on. So now that we've kind of gone into that photograph for news, advertising, or commercial purposes, I wanted to go into how you know if an exclusive jurisdiction post office actually does have a deal, an agreement for local law enforcement to provide law enforcement services there. Now, one of the tools that Majors put up for you guys is the links to the owned and leased properties. Leased properties are concurrent legislative jurisdiction. The local police can go there flat out. Just they absolutely can. If it's an exclusive jurisdiction, the answer is maybe. If they have an agreement, and that agreement comes from what you can see in Poster 7, but Poster 7 is not the authority. There is a United States code that is referenced in 39 CFR 232.1 Q2, and that U.S. code is Title 40 of the United States Code, Chapter 1315, Section D, Paragraph 3. And it says, with the approval of the Chief Postal Inspector. So that's the postal inspector. It's in charge of the Postal Inspection Service. With the approval of the Chief Postal Inspector or his designee, the post office in question can enter into agreements with state and local law enforcement services or agencies to ensure that these rules and regulations are enforced in a manner that will protect Postal Service property. So what you do, and I'm still waiting for my Freedom of Information Act request to get back. It's been quite some time. I've done a FOIA for every single contract between every exclusive jurisdiction post office in the country and whichever law enforcement agencies. And then I'm going to publish that on my website, which I'm actually going to have my website going public at the end of March. And if you guys become members, you can have access to the website and, get access to these documents. And this will be one of those, which is like, here's all of the law enforcement agreements right here. Boom. And that way you can literally know if you go to Boise, Idaho or whatever, you can pull up, hey, does this one exclusive jurisdiction post office have an agreement for local law enforcement services? And if it's no, print that out, take it with you if that's where you're going, have the other laws printed out, and now you're good to go. Um, so that's 40 USC 1315 for where the authority comes from for having those agreements between local law enforcement and the post offices if they're exclusive jurisdiction. Um, Another thing I wanted to address, it's an often not well known law, but it falls into the federal enclave statutes. They're kind of colloquially referred to as that, which is this there's a series of statutes which are based on the Constitution's reference to enclaves, federal enclaves. And federal enclaves are think of like a military installation. So here in Washington state with the Bremerton Naval Yards, that's a chunk of land that's within Washington state, but it's federal property. It's an enclave. It's pure federal exclusive jurisdiction. What's important about that is, let's say there's a crime that exists in Washington state that's not on the federal books, whatever that crime is. What the federal government can do, there's a statute called Title 18 of the United States Code, Chapter 13, and it's referred to as the Assimilative Crimes Act. Its actual title is Laws of States Adopted for Areas Within Federal Jurisdiction. This is really important to know because what this gives authorities the ability to do is to start stacking charges. Now, I was giving Major an example of an occurrence that I had down in Georgia back in 1997 when I got cited $100 for swearing within the presence of a lady. It's like an 1835 law or something like that, where you can't swear around a lady, otherwise you get fined. And I got fined. So what could happen is you could be on federal jurisdiction property, exclusive, and a woman could be walking by, you say something, you swear within her presence, that federal police officer could cite you for that Georgia state law under the Assimilative Crimes Act. And this is a backdoor to getting identity because they always want to get your ID. So the situation here is to understand that if you're going to go to a post office that's exclusive jurisdiction, understand that those federal police officers can still arrest you for the jurisdiction's laws that you're in because of the Assimilative Crimes Act. And again, that's a way for them to identify you and all that kind of stuff, which is very frustrating. And this is a good way to just be aware of it, do some due diligence and study before you get to that location. Hold on, I'm going to read Six Oaks Farm here. Six Oaks Farm, I kind of agree with that. When you say all of the post office facilities are eligible for concurrent jurisdiction, I think that's the thing is um, they're eligible for it. They could take steps to uh, have themselves pulled out of concurrent or out of exclusive jurisdiction, go to concurrent legislative jurisdiction. But when you look at the owned facilities at the USPS website, um, that lays out for you like that's literally a federal enclave. So it's an exclusive jurisdiction in that case. Yeah, I'll take a look at the pre 1941 at a later time, and maybe that will spawn something else, and maybe it'll cause another conversation to occur. Um, but I know from looking at the jurisdictions and having done some work on this, that's at least what my research has told me. And hey, maybe you got something here that'll prove me wrong, and I'll do my calculus all over again. Um, so keep in. Can you chat for a minute about laws regarding public agencies?
Well, let me just interject there and say, while
Sure.
you're reading his question, that that's what makes us different from the anti-auditing community is we'll take information as it comes to us, and we'll evaluate that based on its merits. Uh, I'm sure I am free knows Six Oaks as well. He's very well researched in his own right. Definitely somebody who, when they say something, I take a second and say, "Well, let me check that out." Right. So definitely something to look at as far as that goes. Um, and I do know a little bit about the Assimilated Crimes Act as it deals with the post office. There's a case out of the Ninth Circuit called Waits versus U.S., where a gentleman was trespassed from the post office, and he beat the case by saying that there was no gap in federal law to charge him with state law, and that they should have charged him with a federal law violation, and he won that case. And he was, and the traditional sense, he was trespassing, like he was sleeping in the in the post office where they have the post office boxes, because as everybody knows, they leave those open 24/7. You can go in and get your mail, and this guy had set up shop there and was sleeping in there, so he was definitely and trespassing, but because there was federal law to cover his actions already, the state law wouldn't apply, and they had charged him under the state law, so they ended up losing that case.
Yeah, that's a great case to bring up, and it goes to show why too. Sort of a quick aside: if you have access to a local law library, um, definitely use their LexisNexis account to shepherdize case law. If you think you're going to go do a story that's complicated, go there and shepherdize that case law first and really see what's controlling, like the Waits case that Major just spoke about, because absolutely germane to what's going on, and it gives you more ammunition, if you will, to have that that challenging confrontational discussion with whoever the alleged authority is. Hey John, how you doing? Good to see you in here. Hey, Major, is there any way you could put up Keeping It Reals post again? I wanted to go back to that. By the way, Six Oaks Farm, I want to be clear. I really appreciate you putting that up. I will absolutely look into that. And like I said, if you've provided something to me that is going to put me back on the right track, if I am on the wrong track, I'll tell you right now, I greatly appreciate it, and certainly would never look away from something like that. Um, yeah, keeping it real, I can. I think I know what you're getting at here, but what I'd like to do is finish because I'm actually not too far off from the end of what I was shooting for regarding the post office. This, I think, at least from what I'm reading, is at least for me a Washington State issue, and I think what you're talking about is the records index that relates to the Public Records Act of Washington State, or at least that's what I'm familiar with. And I'd be happy to go over that, but uh, I also respect the fact I'm on someone else's channel who is hosting me, and I want to make sure I get done with what I'm supposed to be doing first, and then, if time allows and Major's down for it, that we can go down that road, because I think that's a really interesting question. Um, so to continue and finish on the materials here, now that I've gone over the Assimilative Crimes Act, there's a couple other things: the stand-up talk from USPS, Poster 7, and the DHS memo. Um, the Poster 7, I think the important thing to remember there is Poster 7 is not a law, it's not a CFR, it's not anything. It's just a poster that the post office put together that provides information to the public that comes from multiple sources. It's an agglomeration of rules and regulations from the CFRs and or the USCs. And that's that's important to know, because sometimes what people will think is that 41 CFR 10274 420, which is the General Services Administration, which is basically the property manager for the federal government. The GSA uses 41, Title 41, for rules and regulations regarding access and conduct on federal property. That applies to all federal property unless Congress has put authoritative statutes out to a cabinet member or whoever the authority is to then create these procedural requirements to do something like the post office did with CFR 39 CFR 232.1. So if the post office didn't have 39 CFR 232.1, we would just default back to 41 CFR 10274 for conduct on postal or on federal property. But in this case, because that exists specifically for the post office, that's the more specific, and that's what you go to.
And if I
Go
could
ahead, Bob.
interject real quick with that, I think it also has to deal with if the agency has the authority to purchase or lease property itself. So, for example, the post office has the 39 CFR. The GSA buildings, which, as you said, is the landlord for a majority of government facilities, Department of Labor, Department of Energy, the Social Security Administration. They have the 41 CFR that they use for the photographs. The VA has, I think, 38 CFR 1.218 quotation 10 as far as their um, regulation for photography. And there's a couple of instances where individual buildings have CFR allowance for recording on their property. So I think that's what it has to do with is their ability to own or lease property themselves, whereas like the GSA, they are the property manager for a whole bunch of federal agencies, Department of Labor, Energy, SSA, all that stuff. So that's what the 41 applies to, is their buildings only, not the VA, not the post office, right? Because they've got their own.
Correct. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's why at the beginning of this discussion, um, I was going over the CFRs and the USCs because it's important to not only understand how they work. I think just if any of us are working in this field as citizen journalists, it's important to understand where to look, why to look there, how to make sense of what you're looking at, all that. But also, it would I could absolutely understand how someone could inadvertently say, "Okay, hey, I'm going to look up the rules," and then they run across conduct on federal property, Title 41 of the CFRs in 10274. And they're like, "Oh, okay, well, this is how I do it." And post office is federal property. There you go. Until you realize actually Title 39 of the CFR 232.1 is what discusses that and is controlling because it's more specific and speaks to directly authority for the post office. And I think that's where people can go wrong. And so understanding the different bodies of regulations, rules, and laws is really helpful to understand where to go to. Um, as far as the stand-up talk, this was really important to come out. I mean, this is a major victory because, especially when you see from frauditor channels, they'll say, "Hey, you don't have the ability to be here. Look at what it says in the paragraph that I really went over in detail earlier to a great degree, I think." This just helps firm up and add legitimacy from the opposition, if you will, the post office, that absolutely you can do what's going on here because they're saying it specifically to their employees. Um, I don't like some of the language, like "don't take the bait." Um, I don't know how many people here have watched my channel or what I do. At the very beginning of getting into this, I used to do compliance audits. Just show up, see if they're complying. Um, and not long afterwards, I started actually getting a pretty good cross section of people just saying, "Hey, you should check this out in this place." And so I started just getting tips and leads from people, and I that's what took me to a place. An elderly gentleman's being kind of treated poorly at a USPS, so I'll go there and check it out, kind of thing. And then something will or will not develop based on my presence. But what they're saying here is they're understanding that after a certain amount of problems that the post office has had, this is them recognizing it and saying, don't don't violate the law. Don't tell them that they don't have a First Amendment liberty to be doing what they're doing, et cetera, down this list. And so the stand-up talk that Major put up here absolutely should be in your back pocket, unless you have it memorized. But it's still good to have, because then you can show people that don't know it, aren't aware of it, by having it present on your body. And then, oh, do you want to say something, Major?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is what I ever since this has come out now this one is from 2023, 22, but they had put one out almost identical to this one in 2018, and I got a copy of that around here somewhere as well. But this is the newer, updated version. And so what I do is I print this out. It's 2 pages. I print it out. I take it with me, and regardless of the outcome of the audit, if they do bad and the cops get come, you could show this to them and say, look, these guys obviously just don't know the rules. It even has the phone number to the postal inspectors that they can call to get clarity on this issue. But let's say the audit goes good and nobody says anything. I still go up to the counter. I still show the employees this, and I say, you guys have done a great job. Have you guys received this training here? That this came through the email. Did you guys receive this training? And a lot of them are like, yeah, yeah, we saw that. We got that last year or whatever. However, and like I said, I haven't been trespassed from a post office in 3 years, and that's even with the postmaster wanting me trespassed. Um, and that's over 150 audits in 15 different states. So, I mean, having this kind of information with you, knowing how the information applies, like Inland's been telling us with the jurisdiction and with the CFRs and who has the authority as other authorized representatives. This kind of information is going to keep you safe, is going to help educate the people there at the post office, and help educate the viewers so that way they know if they ever find themselves in a situation like this.
Great point. And actually, I think that's a great thing to do. I didn't realize you did that, but I think that's a great thing to do, because having that human connection at the end, you know, everybody likes to get an attaboy. I mean, unless they're being sarcastic or something, which obviously you're not being, Major, when you do that. But um, yeah, everybody likes that. I've even done that a couple times, not with the document, but just going up and saying, if anybody saw my Salem, Oregon post office, I can't remember the black guy's name, but he was amazing. Like, he was the best postal employee I think I've ever run across. That guy was absolutely a rock star. You could tell this guy just loved freedom all day, every day. And I went up and I just was like, I'm really appreciative for you and thank you for doing that. And I walked in and thanked his coworkers too, because I was like, this really means a lot that you're being this professional and adhering to the rules that are out there. So that's great. So I think that's awesome you do that, Major. Um, the last thing I wanted to go over is the DHS memo, and it's pretty short and sweet. It doesn't apply here. The Department of Homeland Security memo is going over, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. The DHS memo is going over Title 41 issues, and that's basically general conduct on federal property. So basically, apart from the post office or any other code of federal regulations that discusses something like for the VA, the VA's got its own regulations and whatnot. If it doesn't have its own regulations, then the general Title 41 is what applies, and that's what DHS memo from 2018 is going over. So that's really the, I won't say short and sweet of it because I don't think that was short, but that's the layout. That's the information that Major and I discussed wanting to put out, and so I guess at this point I'd happily make myself available for questions or any discussion you want to have, Major, or go down to
Well,
keeping
I
it real
thought
or whatever.
you wanted to. I thought you wanted to answer this gentleman's question here, and yeah, if
Absolutely.
anybody else has questions, we can put that up there. Six
Sure.
Oaks had something up here about the VA directive
Okay.
1078. Six Oaks, will you email me that stuff, buddy? Because I'm a mess right now, and I got to take off whenever we're done and do some other stuff, so I won't have time to look into it right away. But I don't want to forget that because I do want to look that up. Six Oaks.
Um, so keeping it real, I'll just read it here. It says, "Can you chat for a minute about laws regarding public agencies supposed to have policies and procedures manual available for public viewing in district or headquarter offices?" I'm going to assume you watched my Criminal Justice Training Commission story and saw that I went there to examine the records index. So let me say this first of all to everybody. The Public Records Act of any one state is likely going to be very, very different from one state to another. So that's extremely important to bear in mind as I answer what I think is keeping it real's question here regarding my story. Washington State, shockingly enough, for being the communist empire that it is, has an astoundingly good Public Records Act. It's extremely good. It doesn't mean that the agencies don't try to defy it and cause problems, but it's a very good Public Records Act and may actually even be the best one in the country. That being said, I've been noticing, and I got to give um, a little lead into this, keeping it real, so I can, it'll make more sense. I've been noticing because I'm working on a documentary that I'm going to put out at the end of the year that most of the state government offices, other than forward facing ones that like offer welfare and things like that, or police departments, whatever, courthouses, most state agencies have their people working from home. And I'm talking like 90 to 95% of them are teleworking. If you go to the capital of Washington state, it's empty. There's hardly anyone there on a daily basis. And I'm working on that and uncovering it. And the reason that's important is because I realized one of the ways to try to compel them to have to open their offices again, to like actually physically open the door so I can walk into my building and do my business, is to look to the Public Records Act and see if there's anything that they have to have available to the public Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. kind of stuff. And sure enough, keeping it real, what you're referring to is the records index in Washington state. And that records index is a set of documents that explains how any one agency functions, where their offices are located, who you can contact for different issues, and all that kind of stuff. And the idea behind it is if someone has issues with technology, whatever the issue is, they can always go to that office to access that information. Now, obviously, if you can't get into the office, you can't access the records index. Those agencies are absolutely compelled by Washington administrative codes, which are informed by Washington state statute. They must have that records index available. It's not an option. And so what you want to do, keeping it real, depending on your jurisdiction, I don't know if you're in Washington or not, is you want to go to the Washington administrative codes. I'm speaking to Washington here. Find the department that you're interested in: Department of Corrections, Attorney General, Criminal Justice Training Commission, whatever. You want to go to their administrative code. Actually, you know what, Major? Is there a way? we could pull this up on your screen and I could just kind of show real time what I'm kind of talking about.
Yeah. What are we looking for? What's the?
So yeah, if you just Google Washington Administrative Code,
All right, hang on.
I'm going to show you guys, at least in Washington, what I'm talking about real time.
Okay, so Washington Administrative Code.
hmm
Hold
And
on.
when
Let's see.
you should see a list when you click on the link for it, and what you'll see is a whole bunch of titles, and it'll list departments.
Hold on, I'm bringing it up right now. Is that it right there, pause?
Yep. Okay, so go ahead and, if you wouldn't mind, please, scrolling down to, actually, let's go to the Criminal Justice Training Commission. When I was just, here we go, Title 139. Okay, so what I'm going to show you guys here is administrative codes. Remember how I just went over the Code of Federal Regulations and the United States codes? So codes are statute or law. Code of Federal Regulations are rules and regulations. So that's the executive branch basically implementing rules that Congress is giving it authority in Washington to do. In Washington state, the United States codes would be called Revised Codes of Washington. That's our statutes here. And the Code of Federal Regulations in Washington state is effectively the Washington Administrative Codes. So if you want to know something about an executive branch agency in Washington state, you would go to Title 139 for the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And Major, if you notice in Section 2, it says public records. Can you click on that? And then if you go down to availability of public records, Section 50. You see in subsection 2 where it says records index? Right there. This is really, really important, everyone, at least in Washington state. I want to beat a dead horse here. So let me go to that. This is incredibly important. Like, I cannot overstate that in Washington state how important this is. It says the commission shall have available to all persons at its offices in Burien, which is a city, and that city is where the headquarters for the Criminal Justice Training Commission is, a current index which provides identifying information as to the following records, and then lists them all. And above it, where it says hours for inspection, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, excluding legal holidays and days the campus is closed. Now, this is so important because if any of you have seen my Criminal Justice Training Commission story, I went there to inspect the records index. And when I got into the visitors building, I was initially talking with the secretary, and she said, okay, what are you here for? I explained it. Then all of a sudden they started having a whole bunch of training officers, a deputy, and other people come out. Ultimately, I was trespassed and threatened with arrest if I stayed. And I explained to them, I need to see the records index. They said it's not here. And I'm like, well, then my business isn't done. I need to talk to whoever it is so I can get a better explanation because you don't have one. And this serves two issues. One, it's compliance issue to say, hey, any member of the public should be able to come in here and look at this records index. But also B, it compels them to have to interface with the government. And right now, at least in Washington state, the government is doing everything it can to close down. And if you guys watched my story from yesterday at the administrative offices of the courts, I was literally knocking on the door for 5.5 hours outside in the rain and cold because they weren't going to answer the door. I was going to let them know I was there to get a public records request. So I stayed outside for over 5 hours. I did my thing. And this is what they're doing is they're just trying to shut down and prevent access to the government. So what we have to do as citizen journalists is find the mechanisms to make them open up the doors. And this is one of them. So I hope that answers the question, keeping it real.
All right, good enough, man. That's excellent. And you know, I think Florida's probably just as open as Washington. You know, it's been said online. You know, people say that Florida has the best public records, but let me clarify, and just as Inland clarified, it's if these people provide the records, right? So even though Florida's got a really good public records act and just about everything in the state is considered a public record, if the agency doesn't give you that record, if it ignores your record request, if it, you know, says, no, we're not going to give you these records or whatever, the only way to enforce that act is if you sue them, right? So it's not an easy task. You know, it's like saying you guys are, you know, the most freest, but then you got to pay $50 to have a letter that says you're free, or else you're not really free. And that's sort of what the Public Records Act is here in Florida. But again, it's a lot better than, you know, places like Alabama or South Carolina where you can't even get body cam footage unless you have your lawyer subpoena it for a case that you're involved with. So, you know, it definitely depends on how important the information is to you if you want that record request or not. So,
Yeah, and that's a good point. I don't really know anything. Actually, I do not know anything about the Florida Public Records Act. I will say in Washington, one of the things that's really good that they do here is if they deny your records request, um, almost all, as far as I know, because I haven't interacted with every whack for every agency, but um, the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is a department here in Washington State, has it set up such that all departments of the executive branch of government are compelled in their WACs to have an administrative section that says if your appeal is denied, you can ask for a reconsideration at that department level. If they deny it again, you can get at the expense of the state and an administrative hearing that you go to at the Office of Administrative Hearings to argue your case in front of an administrative judge. And I think the key thing there that's much better is that administrative law has different a whole different reality to review. So like you guys have probably heard terms like judicial review and then different levels of scrutiny for review, like strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny and stuff like that. Administrative review gives a really broad array of tools to an administrative judge to skip past a lot of the rules that you would see in like a criminal trial or even a civil trial. And surprisingly, it is surprising in Washington. Administrative judges take the government to task here regularly, especially for records violations. There's some pretty massive lawsuits that have come about from records requests in Washington State where it's a fine of up to $100 per day per record uh, in Washington State for fines against the government if they don't release those records. And when I say by record, if you do a public records request and let's say there's 15 responsive records, as in 15 pages, that's $100 per day per page. So now the government's accruing $1,500 a day to you as a punitive fine if the government finds in your favor at court. And King County here in Washington State a few years ago got, I think it was like $384,000 to a guy because they just didn't process they refused to process his records request because it was embarrassing to the county commissioners. So it's good in that sense. So hopefully, like I said, that answers your question, keeping it real.
Awesome, awesome sauce. And I got to cut out of here in just a minute. So I was trying to
Okay.
keep it around an hour, but we're at an hour 20, which is fine. We had a lot of awesome stuff to discuss and a lot of information to impart. And hopefully, 6079 Smith, brother, you're welcome on any and all my panels. But I got a family and we've got stuff planned. So if you want to come back when we have another panel, you can tell me all about King County. Um, I would be more than happy to hear that from you, sir. But I've got obligations, so um, I can't just stop what I'm doing um, and do that. But thank you for coming by, and like I said, you're more than welcome on any of my other panels. This was just a short panel from me and this young man, Inland Auditing Media, about Poster 7 and the post office. Um, but I definitely want to hear what you have to say. So definitely come again. I'll have another panel this weekend, I'm sure, and it'll be open. And you're more than welcome to come on up. Inland, thank you, buddy. It's always a pleasure talking to you, sir,
Likewise.
and enjoy your stuff. Most definitely.
Thank you.
Uh, I'm glad
Likewise.
you're out there growing and and helping out there in Washington State. Um, so definitely, thanks again for taking the time to help me even understand it better. Because I think everybody has something to teach if we just take a minute to listen, right?
Sure.
And so it's always a pleasure to talk with like-minded people,
Oh,
and
likewise. I
try to
appreciate you inviting me
bust
on.
stuff out. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, you're always welcome. You've been on a few of my other panels. You're always welcome on my panel. So, as is just about everybody, including trolls. So, uh, I'm really open on the panel, so it doesn't really bother me either way. But
Fair enough.
yeah, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. Everybody in the chat, Farlap, thank you for the 5 membership donations out there. Oklahoma Outlaw Audits, I got to say his name. Uh, 6079 Smith W. I look forward to seeing you and seeing what you got on there for us. And for everybody else, we'll keep putting out content, and we're gonna keep doing what we do. So love you guys. Thanks for the support. Thanks for your time. And if you're not already subscribed to Inland Auditing Media, you need to go over there because man's doing great work. Um, and
Very kind of you.
Matthew the
Thank you.
King, I'm glad we were able to talk to you a little bit about the authorized personnel there. You want to say goodbye, Inland Auditing, or plug anything that you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make it brief. Yeah. Again, everyone, thanks for coming in and watching. I hope it's helpful to you. And again, I want to express my thanks to Major for having me here. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate what you do for the community. And I look forward to having you guys just following along the work that I do in the Communist Empire of Washington State to try to get this stuff exposed. So, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for showing up.
Take care.